Cyberwell is the first ever open database of online anti-Semitism launched in May 2022. We monitor anti-Semitism online across the major social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and what was once known as Twitter, today X. We monitor online anti-Semitism in English and in Arabic, and we act as a trusted partner for the social media platforms, sending them real-time alerts that empower them to enforce and improve their own digital policies and share the data that we collect with efforts fighting hate.
It's a massive work because online space is becoming more difficult every day. I ask this question every time I invite a speaker because I believe it's very important to work within definitions in order to tackle a problem. So the question is, what is the definition of anti-Semitism?
So the standard definition of anti-Semitism that Cyberwell uses and actually applies to our discourse analysis on our data is the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, working definition of anti-Semitism, which generally defines anti-Semitism as a certain manifestation or perception of Jews that can be expressed as hatred towards Jews, rhetorically, physically, online, that's directed to Jews or non-Jews typically perceived as Jews or standing with Jews. And then the IHRA working definition goes into 11 real types of anti-Semitism that can be broadly defined as 4 categories. So one is classic anti-Semitism, political anti-Semitism, Holocaust hate speech or denial and trivialization, and Israel-based anti-Semitism. These are, broadly speaking, historically, the different types of anti-Semitism that we'll see. But I would say, in addition, in my own personal and professional addition to that, I would say that anti-Semitism is a Jew-phobic conspiracy theory that can take many forms and fuel not only hatred and violence towards Jews, but hostility towards Jews. What's unique about anti-Semitism is that it is so nuanced. It has changed its manifestations over time. But one thing that remains true is that it is absolutely based on this scapegoat conspiracy theory for a certain grouping responsible for the troubles of the world.
You monitor anti-Semitism online, Tal-Or. What is the current state of anti-Semitism online?
So the current state of anti-Semitism online, especially post-October 7th, we've seen an explosion of anti-Semitism online and specifically calls to violence against Jews and Israelis. Following the Hamas attacks on October 7th in Israel, we saw an 86% increase in online anti-Semitism overall, so nearly a doubling. And we saw a very clear shift, specifically in our Arabic anti-Semitism database, of an increase of 61% in calls to violence against Jews and Israelis. I could also add some additional color to the state of online anti-Semitism prior to October 7th, if we look more generally at 2023, which I think is valuable. One of the things that I can say that was a positive kind of change in 2023, and I think a lot of the statistics that we're seeing are as a result of, again, an increase in online anti-Semitism in recent months, is that the average rate of removal for reported anti-Semitism increased from 20 to 25% to about 32%. By social media platforms in terms of removal of that online anti-Semitism. While that's an improvement, obviously much more needs to be done. And I can also share with you that what we've noticed about each platform is that they host a different type of anti-Semitic narrative. So when we look at Facebook and Instagram, which are Meta's platforms, we see that the number one leading anti-Semitic tropes are that Jews control the world or are dominating the world order. In Instagram, it's the Rothschild conspiracy theory as the banking ruling family of the world. On TikTok and on X, the number one anti-Semitic trope is that Jews are the enemy, which is very interesting to notice about these specific platforms. Jews are the enemy is a very tribalist, you could argue, concept, maybe even rooted in a religious anti-Semitism. And on YouTube, we also see another form of religious anti-Semitism, which is saying that Jews are the synagogue of Satan. That's a concept that's taken from the New Testament as a criticism of Jews who rejected Jesus Christ. and has been today used by many fraction extreme religious groups to say that the Jews are in a satanic cult of sorts.
Take us, Tal-Or, to October 7th, and I would like you to show us the situation of this surge of anti-Semitism on the day of October 7th and the days that followed.
Sure. So on October 7th, I say because I experienced this myself. October 7th was the largest hijacking of major social media platforms by a terrorist group. That terrorist group is Hamas, and their expressed mission is a genocidal anti-Semitic mission, which is to eradicate and kill Jews. And we saw the manifestation of that mission realized during the Hamas vicious attacks on October 7th. And for the first time, we saw a large-scale hijacking of our social media platforms, live streaming to people's personal Facebook accounts, executions of families, kidnappings of families, parading women naked in the streets after being recently raped and murdered. And then you also saw the reaction to that content, the celebration of that content, a real bloodlust and the celebration, or I say pornographization, of the death of Jews at mass scales. This triggered, among other things, two things. One, as we mentioned before, a very clear increase in calls to violence against Jews, specifically in online anti-Semitism in Arabic. In the Middle East, we saw a very clear affinity or new romanticization and heroification of Hitler, specifically. Hashtag Hitler was right, increased by about 29,000% on X alone, on Twitter alone, in Arabic. And we see this also in the keyword statistics that we are tracking at Cyberwell, that Hitler, in terms of the use of the term of Hitler, just as a figure, went up precipitously. Another thing that we saw very clearly, in addition to these disturbing calls to violence following October 7th and the weeks following, was the beginning of a new form of Holocaust denial, the October 7th denial campaign. And I want to say very clearly, especially to somebody who's a researcher in anti-Semitism and studies anti-Semitism, that October 7th and the Holocaust were two distinct historical events. They shouldn't be conflated. But what connects October 7th denial and Holocaust denial that we saw explode on social media in the weeks following is the anti-Semitic framework of which this conspiracy theory brings people. Every station of anti-Semitic belief is packed into the denial narrative. So if I could explain what I mean by that. We saw as early as October 8th, 10th, and 11th that certain accounts started tweeting out misinformation and disinformation that are part of an October 7th denial narrative. The number one narrative that we see online today, even 6 months after the October 7th attacks, is that rape and sexual violence didn't occur. That's about 38% of the narrative. 36% say that Israel was actually behind the October 7th attacks, that they were purposefully triggering this event and even killing their own people. And finally, anywhere between 5 to 10% of the narrative says that Israel is gaining some kind of financial benefit from the October 7th attack. So what does this do? When you say October 7th never happened, it's all a conspiracy theory or it's all a hoax, what you're essentially saying is a couple of things. One, the fact that Jews died and were killed in mass doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. So trivialization of Jewish life and, more importantly, Jewish death. Two, you're saying that it's a lie. So all of the Jews are lying. And then somebody says, okay, well, if they're all lying, how is it possible that everyone's talking about this? Well, everyone's talking about this because the Jews, or the Zionist faction, are controlling the world. And they want you to talk about this lie because they are getting money from this. So you have just affirmed a bunch of anti-Semitic tropes, that the Jews are liars, that they control the world, and that they're motivated only by money. And what's deeply concerning to me, and I think this is true about anti-Semitism online in general, sometimes the most toxic and violent, triggering forms of anti-Semitism are actually the conspiracy theories, including denial. And we're seeing a real failure on the part of the social media platforms, despite the fact that they have policies that prevent violent event denial, right? Holocaust denial, that's prohibited content. In fact, it's one of the most effectively enforced forms of anti-Semitism.